Sapiens by Yuval Harari. Part 4 The Scientific Revolution. Chapter 17 The Wheels of Industry. The modern economy grows thanks to our trust in the future and to the willingness of capitalists who reinvest in their profits in production. Yet, that does not suffice. Economic growth also requires energy and raw material, and these are finite. When and if they run out, the entire system will collapse. But the evidence provided by the past is that they are finite only in theory. Counterintuitively, while humankind's use of energy and raw materials have mushroomed in the last few centuries, the amounts available for our exploitation have actually increased. Whenever a shortage of either has threatened to slow economic growth, investments have flowed into scientific and technological research. These are invariably produced not only more efficient way of exploiting existing resources, but also completely new types of energy and material. Consider the vehicle industry. Over the last 300 years, humankind have manufactured billions of vehicles, from carts to wheelbarrows to trains, cars, supersonic jets, and space shuttles. One might have expected that such a prodigious efforts would have exhausted the energy resources and raw materials available for vehicle production, and that today we would be scraping to the bottom of the barrel. Yet the opposite is the case. Whereas in 1700, the global vehicle industry relied overwhelmingly on wood and iron, today it has at its disposal the cornucopia of newfound materials such as plastic, rubber, aluminium, and titanium, none of which our ancestors even knew about. Whereas in 1700, carts were built mainly by the muscle power of carpenters and smiths. Today, the machines in Toyota and Boeing factories are powered by petroleum combustion engines and nuclear power stations. A similar revolution has swept almost all other fields of industry. We call it the Industrial Revolution. For millennia prior to Industrial Revolution, humans already knew how to make the use of large variety of energy resources. They burnt wood in order to smelt iron, heat houses and bake cakes. Sailing ships harnessed wind power to move around, and watermills captured the flow of river to grind grain. Yet all these had clear limitations and problems. Trees were not available everywhere. The wind didn't always blow when you needed it, and water power was always useful if you lived near a river. Even bigger problem was that people didn't know how to convert one type of energy into another. They could harness the movement of wind and water to sail ships and push millstones, but not to heat water or smelt iron. Conversely, they could not use the heat energy produced by burning wood to make a million move. Humans had only one machine capable of performing such energy conversion tricks: the body. In the natural process of metabolism, the bodies of human and other animals burn organic fuel known as food and convert the released energy into movement of muscles. Men, women, and beasts could consume grain and meat, burn up their carbohydrates and fats, and use the energy to haul the rickshaw or pull a plow. Since human and animal bodies were the only energy conversion device available, muscle power was the key to almost all human activities. Human muscles built carts and houses. Ox muscles plowed fields, and horse muscles transported goods. The energy that fueled these organic muscle machines came ultimately from a single source: plants. Plants, in their turn, obtained their energy from the sun by the process of photosynthesis. They captured solar energy, packed it into organic compounds. Almost everything people did throughout history was fueled by solar energy, and that was captured by plants and converted into muscle power. Human history was consequently dominated by two main cycles: the growth cycle of plants and the changing cycles of solar energy. When sunlight was scarce and when wheat fields were still green, humans had little energy. Granaries were empty, tax collectors were idle. Soldiers found it difficult to move and fight, and kings tended to keep the peace. When the sun shone brightly and wheat ripened, peasants harvested the crop and filled the granaries. Tax collectors hurried to take their share. Soldiers flexed their muscles and sharpened their swords. Kings convened councils and planned their next campaigns. Everyone was fueled by solar energy, captured and packed in wheat, rice, and potatoes. The secret in the kitchen. Throughout those long millennia, day in and day out, people stood face to face with the most important invention in the history of energy production and failed to notice it. It stared them in eye every time a housewife or a servant put up a kettle to boil water for tea or put a pot full of potatoes on the stove. The minute the water boiled, the lid of the kettle or the pot jumped. Heat was being converted to movement, but jumping pot lids were an annoyance, especially if you forgot the pot on the stove and the water boiled over. Nobody saw their real potential. The partial breakthrough in converting heat into movement followed the invention of gunpowder in the 9th century China. At first, the idea of using gunpowder to propel projectiles was so counterintuitive that for centuries gunpowder was used primarily to produce fire bombs. But eventually, perhaps after some bombs, expert ground gunpowder in a mortar only to have the pestle shoot out with force. Gun made their appearance. About 300 years passed between the invention of gunpowder and the development of effective artillery. Even then, the idea of converting heat into motion remained so counterintuitive that another 3 centuries went by before people invented the next machine that used heat to convert and move things around. The new technology was born in British coal mines. As the British population swelled, forests were cut down to fuel the growing economy and make way for houses and fields. Britain suffered from an increasing shortage of firewood. It began burning coal and as a substitute. Many coal seams were located in the waterlogged areas, and flooding prevented miners from accessing the lower strata of the mines. It was a problem looking for a solution. Around 1700, a strange noise began reverberating around British mine shafts. That noise, harbinger of the Industrial Revolution, was subtle at first, but it grew louder and louder with each passing decade until it enveloped the entire world in a deafening cacophony. It emanated from a steam engine. There are many types of steam engines, but they all share one common principle. You burn some kind of fuel, such as coal, and use the resulting heat to boil water, produce steam. As the steam expands, it pushes the piston. The piston moves, and anything that is connected to the piston moves with it. You have converted heat into movement. In 18th century British coal mines, the piston was connected to a pump that extracted water from the bottom of the mine shafts. The earliest engines were incredibly inefficient. You needed to burn a huge load of coal in order to pump out even a tiny amount of water. But in the mines of coal was plentiful and close at hand, so nobody cared. In the decades that followed, British entrepreneurs improved the efficiency of the steam engine, brought it out of the mine shafts and connected it to the looms and gins. This revolutionized textile production, making it possible to produce ever larger quantities of cheap textiles. In the blink of an eye, Britain became the workshop of the world. But even more importantly, getting the steam engine out of the mines broke an important psychological barrier. If you could burn coal in order to move textile looms, why not use the same method to move other things, such as vehicles? In 1825, a British engineer connected a steam engine to a train of mine wagon full of coal. The engine drew the wagon along an iron rail, some 20 kilometers along from the mine to the nearest harbour. This was the first steam-powered locomotive in history. Clearly, if the steam could be used to transport coal, why not other goods? And why not even people? On September 15, 1830, the first commercial railway line was opened, connecting Liverpool with Manchester. The train moved under the same steel power that has previously pumped water and moved textile looms. A mere 20 years later, Britain had tens of thousands of kilometers of railway track. Henceforth, people became obsessed with the idea that machines and engines could be used to convert one type of energy into another. Any type of energy anywhere in the world might be harnessed to whatever need you have, if we could just invent the right machine. For example, when physicists realized that an immense amount of energy is stored within atoms, They immediately started thinking about how this energy could be released and used to make electricity, power submarines, and annihilate cities. 600 years passed between the moment Chinese alchemists discovered gunpowder and the moment Turkish cannon pulverized the walls of Constantinople. Only 40 years passed between the moment Einstein determined that any kind of mass could be converted into energy. That's why E is equals to mc square means and the moment atom bombs obliterated Hiroshima and Nagasaki and nuclear power stations mushroomed all over the globe. Another crucial discovery was the internal combustion engine, which took little more than a generation to revolutionize human transportation and turn petroleum into liquid political power. Petroleum has been known for thousands of years and was used to waterproof roof and lubricate axles. Yet, until just a century ago, nobody thought it was useful for much more than that. The idea of spilling blood for the sake of oil would have seemed ludicrous. You might find a war over land, gold, pepper, or slaves, but not oil. The career of electricity was more startling yet. 2 centuries ago, electricity played no role in the economy and was used at most for arcane scientific experiments and cheap magic tricks. A series of inventions turned it into a universal genie in a lamp. We flick our fingers and it print books and sew clothes, keep our vegetables fresh and our ice cream frozen, cooks our dinners and executes our criminals, registers our thoughts and records our smiles, lights up our nights and entertains us with countless television shows. Few of us understand how electricity does all these things, but even fewer can imagine life without it. An ocean of energy. At heart, the Industrial Revolution has been a revolution in energy conversion. It has demonstrated again and again that there is no limit to the amount of energy at our disposal, or more precisely, that the only limit is set by our ignorance. Every few decades, we discover a new energy source so that the sum total of energy at our disposal just keeps growing. Why are so many people afraid that we are running out of energy? Why do they warn of disaster if we exhaust all available fossil fuels? Clearly, the world does not lack energy. All we lack is knowledge necessary to harness and convert it to our needs. The amount of energy stored in all the fossil fuels on Earth is negligible compared to the amount that Sun dispenses every day, free of charge. Only a tiny proportion of the Sun's energy reaches us, yet it amounts to around 3,766,800 exajoules of energy each year. In the metric system, about the amount you expend to lift a small apple 1 meter straight up. An exajoule is a billion joules. That's a lot of apples. All the world's plants capture only about 3,000 of those solar exajoules through the process of photosynthesis. All human activities and industries put together consume about 500 exajoules annually, equivalent to the amount of energy Earth receives from the Sun in just 90 minutes. And that's only solar energy. In addition, we are surrounded by other enormous sources of energy, such as nuclear energy and the gravitational energy, and later, most evident in the power of the ocean tides caused by the moon's pull on the Earth. Prior to Industrial Revolution, the human energy market was almost completely dependent on plants. People lived alongside a green energy reservoir, carrying 3,000 exajoules a year, and tried to pump as much of its energy as they could. Yet, there was a clear limit to how much they could extract. During the Industrial Revolution, we came to realize that we are actually living alongside an enormous ocean of energy, one holding billions upon billions of exajoules of potential power. All we need to do is to invent better pumps. Learning how to harness and convert energy effectively solved the other problems that slows economic growth, the scarcity of raw material. As humans worked out how to harness large quantities of cheap energy, they could begin exploiting previously inaccessible deposits of raw material or transporting raw materials from ever more distant locations. Simultaneously, scientific breakthroughs enables humankind to invent completely new raw materials such as plastics and discover previously unknown natural materials such as silicon and aluminium. Chemists discovered aluminium only in 1820s, but separating the metal from its ore was extremely difficult and costly. For decades, aluminium was much more expensive than gold. In the 1860s, Emperor Napoleon III of France commissioned aluminium cutlery to be laid out for his most distinguished guests. Less important visitors had to make to do with gold knives and forks. But at the end of 19th century, chemists discovered a way to extract immense amount of cheap aluminium, and current global production stands at 30 million tons per year. Napoleon III would be surprised to hear that his subjects' descendants used cheap disposable aluminium foil to wrap their sandwiches and put away their leftovers. 2000 years ago, when people in the Mediterranean basin suffered from dry skin, they smeared olive oil in their hands. Today, they open a tube of hand creams. Below in the list is the list of ingredients of simple modern hand cream that I bought at a local store. Almost all these ingredients were invented or discovered in the last 2 centuries. During the First World War, Germany was placed under blockade and suffered severe shortages of raw material, in particular saltpetre, an essential ingredient in gunpowder and other explosive. The most important saltpetre deposits were in Chile and India. There were none in the Germany. True saltpetre could be replaced by ammonia, but that was expensive to produce as well. Luckily for the Germans, one of their fellow citizens, a Jewish chemist named Fritz Haber, has discovered in 1908 a process of producing ammonia literally out of thin air. When war broke out, the Germans used Haber's discovery to commence industrial production of explosives, using air as raw material. Some scholars believe that if it hadn't been the Haber's discovery, Germany would have been forced to surrender long before November 1918. The discovery won Haber a Nobel Prize in 1918 in chemistry, not in peace. Life on conveyor belt. The Industrial Revolution yielded an unprecedented combination of cheap and abundant energy and cheap and abundant raw materials. The result was an explosion in human productivity. The explosion was felt first and foremost in agriculture. Usually, when we think of Industrial Revolution, we think of an urban landscape of smoking chimneys or a plight of exploited coal miners sweating in the bowels of the earth. Yet, the Industrial Revolution was, above all else, the second agricultural revolution. During the last 200 years, Industrial Revolution methods became the mainstay of agriculture. Machines such as tractors began to undertake tasks that were previously performed by muscle power or not performed at all. Fields and animals became vastly more productive thanks to artificial fertilizers, industrial insecticides, and an entire arsenal of hormones and medications. Refrigerators, ships, and aeroplanes have made it possible to store produce for months and transport it quickly and cheaply to other side of the world. Europeans began to dine on fresh Argentinian beef and Japanese sushi. Even plants and animals were mechanized. Around the time that Homo sapiens was elevated to divine status by humanist religions, farm animals stopped being viewed as a living creature that would feel pain and distress and instead came to be treated as machines. Today, these animals are often mass-produced in factory-like facilities, their bodies shaped in accordance with industrial needs. They pass their entire lives as cogs in a giant production line, and the length and quality of their existence is determined by the profits and losses of business corporations. Even when the industry takes care of and keeps them alive, reasonably healthy and well-fed, it has no intrinsic interest in the animal's social and psychological needs. Egg-laying hens, for example, have a complex world of behavioral needs and drives. They feel strong urges to scout their environment, forage and peck around, determine social hierarchies, build nests, and groom themselves. But the egg industry often locks the hens inside tiny coops, and it is not uncommon for it to squeeze 4 hens to a cage, each given a floor space of about 25 to 22 centimeters. The hens receive sufficient food, but they are unable to claim a territory, build a nest, or engage in other natural activities. Indeed, the cage is so small that hens are often unable to flap their wings or stand fully erect. Pigs are amongst the most intelligent and inquisitive of mammals, second, perhaps only to the great apes. Yet, industrialized pig farms routinely confine nursing sows inside such small crates that they are literally unable to turn around. They so- the sows are kept in these crates day and night for 4 weeks after giving birth. Their offsprings are taken away to be fattened up, and the sows are impregnated over the next litter of piglets. Many dairy cows live almost all their allotted years inside a small enclosure, standing, sitting, and sleeping in their own urine and excrement. They receive their measures of food, hormones, and medications from one set of machines and get milked every few hours by another set of machines. The cow in the middle is treated as a little more than a mouth that can take in raw material and an udder that produces a commodity, treating living creatures possessing complex emotional worlds as if they were machines is likely to cause them not only physical discomfort but also social stress and psychological frustration. Just as the Atlantic slave trade did not stem from hatred towards Africans, so the modern animal industry is not motivated by animosity. Again, it is fueled by indifference. Most people who produce and consume eggs, milk, and meat rarely stop to think about the fate of the chickens, cows, and pigs whose flesh and emissions they are eating. Those who do think often argue that such animals are really little different from machines, devoid of sensations and emotions, incapable of suffering. Ironically, the same scientific disciplines which shape our milk machines and egg machines have lately demonstrated beyond reasonable doubt that mammals and birds have a complex sensory and emotional makeup. They not only feel physical pain but can also suffer from emotional distress. Evolutionary psychology maintains that the emotional and social needs of farm animals evolved in the wild when they were essential for survival and reproduction. For example, a wild cow had to know how to form close relations with other cows and bulls, or else she could not survive and reproduce. In order to learn the necessary skills, evolution implanted in cows, as in the young of all other social mammals, a strong desire to play. And it implanted in them an even strong desire to bond with their mothers, whose milk and care was essential for survival. What happens if farmers now take a young calf, separate her from her mother, put her in closed cage, give her food, water, inoculations against disease, and then, when she is old enough, inseminate her with bull sperm? From an objective perspective, this calf no longer needs either maternal bonding or playmates in order to survive and reproduce. But from a subjective perspective, the calf still feels a very strong urge to bond with her mother and play with other calves. If these urges are not fulfilled, the calf suffers greatly. This is the basic lesson of evolutionary psychology. A need shaped in the wild continues to be felt subjectively, even if it is no longer really necessary for survival and reproduction. The tragedy of industrial agriculture is that it takes great care of objective needs of animals while neglecting their subjective needs. The truth of this theory has been known at least since 1950s, when the American psychologist Harari studied the development of monkeys. Harlow separated infant monkeys from their mothers several hours after birth. The monkeys were isolated inside cages and then raised by dummy mothers. In each cage, Harlow placed 2 dummy mothers. One was made of metal wires and was fitted with a milk bottle from which the infant mother could suck. The other was made of wood covered with clothes, which made it resemble like a real monkey mother, but it provided the infant monkey with no material sustenance whatsoever. It was assumed that the infant would cling to the nourishing metal mother rather than to barren cloth one. To Harlow's surprise, the infant monkeys showed a marked preference for the cloth mother, spending most of their times with her. When the 2 mothers were placed in close proximity, the infant held onto the cloth mother even while they reached over to suck milk from the metal mother. Harlow suspected that perhaps the infants did so because it was cold. So he fitted an electric bulb inside the wire mother, which now radiated heat. Most of the monkeys, except for the very young ones, continued to prefer the cloth mother. Follow-up research showed that Harlow's orphaned monkeys grew up to be emotionally disturbed, even though they had received all the nourishment they required. They never fitted into monkey society, had difficulties communicating with other monkeys, and suffered from high levels of anxiety and aggression. The conclusion was inescapable. Monkeys must have psychological needs and desires to go beyond their material requirements, and if these are not fulfilled, they will suffer greatly. Harlow's infant monkeys preferred to spend their times in the hands of barren cloth mother because they were looking for an emotional bond and not only for milk. In the following decades, numerous studies showed that this conclusion applies not only to monkeys but to other mammals as well as birds. At present, millions of farm animals are subjected to same conditions as Harlow's monkeys, as farmers routinely separate calves, kids, and other youngsters from their mothers to be raised in isolation. Altogether, tens of billions of farm animals live today as part of mechanized assembly line, and about 50 billion of them are slaughtered annually. These industrial livestock methods have led to a sharp increase in agricultural production and in human food reserves. Together with the mechanization of plant cultivation, industrial animal husbandry is the basis of entire modern socio-economic order. Before the industrialization of agriculture, most of food produced in the field and farms was wasted feeding peasants and farmyard animals. Only a small percentage was available to feed artisans, teachers, priests, and bureaucrats. Consequently, in almost all societies, peasants comprised more than 90% of the population. Following the industrialization of agriculture, a shrinking number of farmers was enough to feed a growing number of clerks and factory hands. Today, in the United States, only 2% of the population makes a living from agriculture. Yet, this 2% produces enough not only to feed the entire US population, but also to export surpluses to the rest of the world. Without the industrialization of agriculture, the urban industrial revolution could never have taken place. There would not have been enough hands and brains to staff factories and offices. As those factories and offices absorbed the billions of hands and brains that were released from fieldworks, they began pouring out an unprecedented avalanche of products. Humans now produce far more steel, manufacture much more clothing, and build many more structures than ever before. In addition, they produce a mind-boggling array of previously unimaginable goods such as light bulbs, mobile phones, cameras, and dishwashers. For the first time in human history, supply began to outstrip demand, and an entirely new problem was born. Who is going to buy all of these stuffs? The age of shopping. The modern capitalist economy must constantly increase production if it is to surprise, like a shark that must swim or suffocate. Yet, it's not enough just to produce. Somebody must buy the products, or industrialists and investors alike will go bust. To prevent this catastrophe and to make sure that people will always buy whatever new stuff industry produces, a new kind of ethic appeared: consumerism. Most people throughout history lived under conditions of scarcity. Frugality was thus their watchword. And austere ethics of Puritans and Spartans are but two famous examples. A good person avoided luxuries, never threw food away, and patched up torn trousers instead of buying a new pair. Only kings and nobles allowed themselves to renounce such values publicly and conspicuously flaunt their riches. Consumerism sees the consumption of even more products and services as a positive thing. It encourages people to treat themselves, spoil themselves, and even kill themselves slowly by overconsumptions. Frugality is a disease to be cured. You don't have to look far to see the consumer ethic in action. Just read the back of the cereal box. Here's a quote from the box, one of my favorite breakfast cereals, produced by the Israeli firm Telma. Sometimes you need a treat. Sometimes you need a little extra energy. There are times to watch your weight and times when you've just got to have something right now. Telma offers a variety of tasty cereals just for you. Treats without remorse. The same package sports an ad for another brand of cereal called Health Treats. Health Treats offers lots of grains, fruits, and nuts for an experience that combines taste, pleasure, and health. For an enjoyable treat in the middle of the day, suitable for healthy lifestyle, a real treat with a wonderful taste and of more. Throughout most of history, people were likely to have been repelled rather than attracted by such texts. They would have branded it as selfish, decadent, and morally corrupt. Consumerism has worked very hard with the help of popular psychology to convince people that indulgence is good for you, whereas frugality is self-oppression. It has succeeded. We are all good consumers. We buy countless products that we don't really need and that until yesterday we didn't know it existed. Manufacturers deliberately design short-term goods and invent new and unnecessary models of perfectly satisfactory products that we must purchase in order to stay in. Shopping has become a favorite pastime, and consumer goods have become essential medications in relationships between family members, spouses, and friends. Religious holidays such as Christmas has become a shopping festival. In the United States, even Memorial Day, originally a solemn day for remembering fallen soldiers, is now an occasion for special sales. Most people mark this day by going shopping, perhaps to prove that the defenders of freedom did not die in vain. The flowering of the consumerist ethics is manifested most clearly in the food market. Traditional agricultural societies live in awful shade of starvation. In the affluent world of today, one of the leading health problems is obesity, which strikes the poor, even so, more severely than the rich. Each year, the US population spends more money on diets than amounts needed to feed all hungry people in the rest of the world. Obesity is a double victory for consumerism. Instead of eating little, which will lead to economic contraction, people eat too much and then buy diet products, contributing to economic growth twice over. How can we square the consumerist ethic with the capitalist ethic of the business person, according to which profits should not be wasted and should instead be reinvested in production? It's simple. As in previous eras, there is today a division of labor between the elite and the masses. In the medieval Europe, aristocrats spent their money carelessly on extravagant luxuries, whereas peasants lived frugally, minding every penny. Today, the tables have turned. The rich take greater care managing their assets and investments, while the less well-heeled go into debt buying cars, television they don't really need. The capitalist and consumerist ethic are two sides of the same coin. The merger of the two commandments. The supreme commandment of the rich is invest, and the supreme commandment of the rest of the world is to buy. The capitalist consumerist ethic is revolutionary in other respect. Most previous ethical systems presented people with a pretty tough deal. They were promised paradise, but only if they cultivated compassion and tolerance, overcame craving and anger, and restrained from selfish interests. This was too tough for most. The history of ethics is a sad tale of wonderful ideals that nobody can live up to. Most Christians did not imitate Christ, most Buddhists failed to follow Buddha, and most Confucians would have caused Confucius a temper tantrum. In contrast, most people today successfully live up to the capitalist consumerist ideal. The new ethic promises paradise on condition that the rich remains greedy and spend their time making more money, and that the masses give free rein to their cravings and passion, and buy more and more. This is the first religion in the history whose followers actually do what they are asked to do. How though do we know that we'll get paradise in return? We have seen it on television.